Now for some political history, with a look back at a pivotal chapter from Watergate. Recently, Judy Woodruff sat down with a Nixon administration official who was in the thick of it back then and is watching today's news with a wary eye.
It was a political drama with parallels today, one that pitted a president against the U.S. Justice Department and jolted Washington on the night of October 20th, 1973. President Richard Nixon that day was trying to get rid of the special prosecutor investigating the Watergate scandal. His Attorney General, Elliot Richardson, refused to carry out the order and resigned. Richardson's deputy, William Ruckelshaus, who immediately became acting attorney general, also refused, and he followed Richardson out the door. In the end, President Nixon succeeded in getting the special prosecutor discharged, but the Nixon presidency only lasted another 10 months. The episode has been dubbed the Saturday Night Massacre, and William Ruckelshaus, one of the central characters from that night, joins us now. Thank you very much for being with us, Bill Ruckelshaus. 44 years ago, this happened. How fresh is it in your memory?
Well, it'll be there as long as I'm around. It certainly became a very important part of my life and affected it directly for the next several months, but it's never left my consciousness.
Were you worried at the time that President Nixon would get away with what he was trying to do?
Not really. I didn't think at the time that the American people would tolerate firing a man who is essentially hired by the Senate and by the Justice Department to investigate crimes that they expected were committed by the president.
How similar, and you've written about this recently, how similar and how different are what happened back then to what's going on right now with the Trump presidency and the Russia investigation?
One difference is in the nature of the people involved. The two presidents are clearly not the same kind of person. There was also a Republican administration and a Democratic Congress back in 1973, and today we have one party dominating both the presidency as well as the Congress. In many respects, the rest of it is similar. Now, in the first place, we don't know whether President Trump will try to fire Bob Mueller, the special counsel he's now called, but he might, and he's hinted that he might. And if he does, I expect the result will be the same, that the public will, once they digest it, not tolerate it.
We know that he certainly expressed a desire for Bob Mueller to step down. He isn't happy with what he's doing. If he can't get someone or the process to remove Robert Mueller, do you believe he could use some sort of executive order to remove him?
Well, I think he can remove him if he wants to. He would have to be discharged by now the Deputy Attorney General, since General Sessions has recused himself from this investigation. But he could just keep going down the list of Justice Department employees and finally find somebody who would carry out his wishes. I don't think that's going to be an issue for him if that's what he wants to do, but that's not what's going to sink him.
You wrote about this week. You also said that you thought the public anger today is not as great against President Trump as it was then against President Nixon.
I think that's right. On this issue that we're talking about, Trump has only been in office 6 months, a little over 6 months. Whereas Nixon had been there for 4 years, then been reelected, and had been there for about a year or so. And he was also vice president, of course, under President Eisenhower. So the public had had a long time to get used to President Nixon and what he was all about. They haven't had that time with President Trump, so they're not adjusted enough to his habits, I don't think, to decide that he should be impeached or in some way driven out of office. It's just too soon.
William Ruckelshaus, the country clearly did survive Watergate. It racked the country, it racked the government at the time, but the country survived and moved on. What do you think that, and what do you think today's controversy with regard to the Russia investigation says about our government, says about our people?
It says we're confused, the administrative branch at least, doing extraordinary things to please them. Many of the people in the Congress are confused by these actions, both parties, and want to investigate why the Russian government interfered with our election. That's a very serious charge to make. It's a very serious thing for them to do. One of the central tenets of a democracy is to be able to have a free vote for your leadership, and having taken that vote, then to find a long-term antagonist like Russia to interfere with the exercise of that kind of power is really quite extraordinary. I think this investigation should be carried out by Bob Mueller. I think he's a first-rate prosecutor, first-rate public servant. It'll be credible, it will be fair, and the public will be satisfied that justice will have been done.
One other thing you told us, Bill Ruckelshaus, that you wanted, that was on your mind, and that is, as you watch the Trump administration, the Trump White House, the challenge of serving both the president and the American people at the same time when those two things may come in conflict.
That's a good question. When I was confirmed, just as Elliot Richardson had been 3 months earlier, we both pledged that we would not discharge that special prosecutor except for extraordinary improprieties. And when you are faced with the question of obeying the president's order, you don't decide not to do that lightly. You take that very seriously. After all, he was elected and you weren't, so you don't always get your way in terms of what you want to do. But if he asks you to do something that you believe is fundamentally wrong, then you should not do it. And you should tell yourself that before you go into one of these jobs in Washington, so that you don't find yourself compromising your principles or your conscience.
Something for every administration, every group of people who serve every president to remember. William Ruckelshaus, joining us from Seattle. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Judy.